No, this is a classic paradox of a question. When anybody asks, "What's your favorite material to work with?" and whether that material is sustainable or not. And see, one of the paradoxes is that, let's say, if you say in Bangalore, you start using the stone because it's a natural material, it's available in and around Bangalore. Hypothetically, like every project, every building, everybody starts using stone. What's going to happen? You're effectively defacing the entire landscape in and around Bangalore or even further away. Is that a sustainable practice? See, that's one of the paradoxes. Brick also consumes a lot of energy in its production, because you're taking clay from there, but to produce it, to burn it, to kind of fire it, and you create bricks, also consumes a lot of energy. But yes, you can say it's soil, but if everybody starts using a certain material, it's a debate which is still ongoing. Like, what is it that when we talk about materials, is it sustainable or not? Wood for a long period, and of course in India it's kind of banned to do an entire construction with wood, was a process by which you can plant trees. You can plant 100 trees if you cut 2 trees, let's say, or 10 trees, whatever the ratio is, which, by the way, a lot of countries like Canada and the US, they apply that. For every tree that you cut, you have to plant about 10 more trees. And the whole idea is that you can work with wood as a material for construction. Wood is a fantastic material, but it's counterintuitive when we talk about sustainability and say, how can you use wood? How can you cut trees and so on? So it's a debate, it's a question, what is it that makes more sense? When we talk about plastic, suddenly say plastic or metal is, no, it's non-sustainable. I feel the logic of sustainability is a lot to do with reuse, which means, for example, steel can be reused. Brick, no, because maybe it goes back to the soil. Stone, yes, maybe you can reuse it. However, the entire objective of reuse becomes the talking point as far as sustainable materials are concerned. Let's go back in time, look at traditional architecture. In India, for example, if you go to Kerala, you'll see a house which is about 500 years old, which has these beautiful courtyards and old carvings on these beautiful wooden pillars. And the fact is, I think they were one of the first, not just that, across the world, where there was hardly any technological interventions, but the technology was largely through the crafting of the buildings, of those residences, right? The way it was designed, the fact that there's a courtyard which brings in natural light, it allows air to flow with these jalis, beautiful spaces, sculpted spaces in which people reside in. Those are the original green buildings, if you have to really look into it from that point of view. However, as a lost art, as we call it, because it's very difficult to work with or to create projects like that, unless it becomes a very superficial exercise, making it look like an old Kerala house, the architecture. It becomes more like a film set rather than actually, designing a building with a certain philosophy. But it's exciting to see a lot of architects in Kerala who are experimenting with material. I just love the work of Vinu Daniel, the wall makers, the way they're working with material and experimenting with that, and not just, I think it's not just material, but even how the architecture is crafted, the whole minimalistic approach and working with material. Materiality is not really being explored by most architects in India, because I think we are succumbing to the powers of capitalism, where products are being pushed down upon us. Okay, there's ready-made products, use them, rather than experimenting, exploring, crafting, working with different materials. There are different possibilities. I see the future in bamboo, for example. I recently came back from Bali and I was fascinated by the usage of bamboo. Of course, most architects are aware of how Southeast Asian countries are exploring with bamboo. But I feel that's one material which is for the future, which really need to look into, because the bamboo grows really well, and it's an extremely versatile material, and we should be exploring things like that. New materials, new technologies can bring in. We're talking about bricks made with rice husk. We're talking about sugar cane, the pulp of it. Once it's the sugar is extracted. So can we reuse that? So I think a lot of it is reusing materials which is normally considered as waste, and that I think is the way forward. Not just saying that stone and brick, that's, of course, that's there. But what can we create? Can we create new products which normally would have been seen as waste and would have reached the dump yard, would have reached the garbage pit? And can we look at it in a different way? Plastic, for example, can we reuse it? How can we do it? I think that's a big challenge in today's world, because so much of waste is being dumped into the oceans and into zones around the city, like certain areas where garbage is still burning for years, and it's creating actually pollution in many of these places. So how can we utilize that? A lot of thoughts are going on about creating roads working with plastic bottles. You actually pellets you can create through that, and you are paving, you are creating roads using these waste materials. So can we look at it from that perspective? Can there be more innovators? And already it's happening in India and across the world, where they're looking at alternate materials, and not just depend on this traditional ones that we call it as sustainable and green. Yeah. So my house, when I designed it, the process started in around 2001. The project got completed in 2002-3, around that time. So it's been 22 years. So one of the things was the budget. So my dad said, itna hi paisa hai. So start off with, you have so many constraints. Of course, I had to work with Vastu also at the same time. Large constraint with the budget. And then, of course, there's a design philosophy. You want to achieve something. As a young architect, you're saying, this is going to be an award-winning project. I'm going to create my house, and this is, and so on. At the same time, you realize, and that's like a reality check, when you realize that so many of these constraints are there when you're building. The most important thing was that there was an existing house there before, which was built in 1975. The question was, do we completely demolish it and build a new structure, or do I reuse certain things from that? And I've said earlier, I'm a huge fan of, can we make something out of this? So one of the first things which I did was to work with the existing foundation of the old house. 2, I reused all the doors and windows of the old house. 3, I retained some of the walls. It became part of the architectural expression. And then, of course, I had to create retrofit new columns and foundations. Okay, it's a load-bearing structure, by the way, mind you. And then come up with an architectural vocabulary of language, which was largely working with the local materials. And I got Nirmiti Kendra to be a part of that for the construction. I got 1 or 2 of my students. I was teaching in Manipal that time. While I was teaching, I was a contractor for this one, to help out, to supervise at certain times. Anutama was part of that, I remember. She was one of my students. She was doing a thesis that time. So you just look at it, take care of it while I'm at the college. But Nirmiti Kendra, working with them, brought in so many technologies also. So for example, I worked with brick walls. I worked with exposed laterite stone, which is quite common in the office I was to work before in Goa with architect Dean De Cruz. I used filler slabs and red oxide flooring in terracotta tiles. I also brought in you see these granite poles which are used for boundary walls in Karnataka. So you place these granite poles. I found this beautifully cut pieces, and I said, why can't we create a wall out of that? So I brought that to create certain components within the space. Flat arches, precast staircases, and one very interesting thing was that because I reused all the doors and windows of the old house, woodwork I saved a lot. Not only that, a lot of windows were actually used in the kitchen as storage units, as shutters, the old windows, because they had this different type of windows with, like, an entire window is made up of 4 different panels. So I could use these as shutters for the kitchen storage units. And as I said, locally available materials, local craftsmen, nothing brought from anywhere else. And one very interesting thing, I said I'm going to design a house which doesn't require any curtains. I know that sounds weird, but the point was that it has optimal light throughout the day, where I don't need to, utilize the curtains. And because of, there's no issue of privacy here, because nobody can look into the house. The way the windows have been organized is that nobody actually looking into it. So there are either jalis, or the window openings are positioned where there's a boundary wall which is higher, so nobody is looking into the house, and so on. As a design process, of course, I utilized solar panels for that one also, for at least for the water, as well as water heating, as well as for emergency lights and so on. But beyond that, I think the entire approach to design was cost saving. It is a 2,400 square feet house, and it costed us about 7 lakhs in 2003 by the time it was completed. So it was about 300 to 350 rupees a square feet. At that point of time, the construction cost was about 550 or 600 for a regular construction. And, I was able to do that for that less cost per square feet. However, the paradox now is that it's become the colored story. If you want to build a house now with this exposed brick and laterite and, utilize those kind of systems, it's actually more expensive than conventional construction. And that's the funny part, because there was a time when, it used to be called as low cost construction. But yes, I think if the idea is there, if the approach is there, you can always recreate structures like that. It's very difficult to build thing, it's no, because it became a fad by itself. Exposed laterite became a fad. So exposed laterite tiles were manufacturing, and they're very expensive now to do that. So it's funny because project, my house, which is supposed to be a low cost one, now is being considered as an expensive structure, but nobody's going to buy it. Yeah. Vastu Shastra and me have had a love-hate relationship for a long time now. My own house, after I designed, I spent a month designing it, and my father, and he called a Vastu expert who destroyed the design in like exactly 5 seconds. And this was, of course, I had begun my career as an architect. It's just been 3-4 years since I had graduated. You're lucky to work on your own house, like to design, if you get to design your own house. However, it's a tricky thing because, as they say, a doctor can never operate on themselves. So, and should an architect design their own house? It's a painful process, We had a lot of arguments, and eventually, I said I'm not going to design the house because the design is completely changed by the Vastu person. And then eventually I said, what? He's only seeing it in 2 dimensions, but he's not seeing it in the 3-dimensional aspect of the building. So eventually got onto it. I took up the project. It came out pretty interesting. This is one of my first projects on my own completely. not working for anyone else, right? And that also became an interesting thing because I realized in some cases I could use Vastu Shastra principles to my advantage. I'm sounding very manipulative out here, but let me tell you, like the farmhouse that we're designing, the client said that the road level is higher than where the house is coming, so we have to raise the entire house. So we have to raise the entire house by 10 feet. They spent quite a bit of it on just doing that. The entire house is raised by 10 feet, which is about 100 meters away from the road. But that gave us an opportunity to create this beautiful mounds and stepping down, openness, theater spaces, and landscaping cascading down, water bodies flowing down, and suddenly the architecture became quite interesting just by there was one thought from Vastu, so we can use it to our advantage. I have a big problem with Vastu, and the problem is I'm a person who believes in logic, reasoning, and science. And the beauty of science is science evolves, which means that it challenges, it questions, and then comes up with different possibilities for that. But the questioning is one of the most important parts of science, because there is a theory today. It's a theory, it's not a law. So therefore it's a theory, and then now question it, research on it, and then finally say yes. It becomes a law of sorts. Whereas belief cannot be challenged. Now that's the problem, because when you're working with science, this is a very funny thing, because Vastu Shastra means the science of building. If it is science, then can't you question it? And that's the paradox, right? Because is it superstition? Is it a belief? Or is it an evolving science? If you think about it, when was it written? Who wrote the books of Vastu Shastra? If it was written 2,000, 3,000 years ago, who changed the rules for apartments? Who changed the rules for offices and buildings, more multiplexes, which were never existing 3,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago? Toilets never used to be part of any house. There was no artificial lighting, or there was no air conditioning. So, how can you apply the principles which was about 4,000 years ago, where technology was different, where the cultural, the system, the way the society ran was different, when you don't have interventions of technology at all? Obviously, the architecture would have been different for that time. And now, when things have changed, haven't you also looked at the science behind it? When clients ask me, is your building based on Vastu? I said, yes, my buildings are based on science. So my buildings are Vastu Shastra. There is Vastu Shastra involved, which means there is a science to the design. And it's not blind belief. So, which means that there is any design. And if Vastu Shastra, and by the way, there are a lot of principles in that which are very relevant. So I will give it that, which are relevant in terms of the climate. A lot of principles which still make sense. But you cannot apply the same logic for a building in Orlando. One of our clients was designing a building in Orlando, and they've taken a Vastu person from here. He didn't take me, but he took the Vastu person to verify whether his house in Orlando is designed according to Vastu Shastra or not. Does it make sense? Because you can't. Can you apply the same thing if you're designing a building in Ladakh, for that matter, or East Coast and the West Coast, the south tip of India? Does it even make sense? Can it be exactly the same? Because every site is different. If you go cut across India, the climate changes. How can it be exactly the same?